So what are some things that leaders do that make them successful that others don't? I think one of the things is
So Richard, welcome to the show. It's a real pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love having this, getting the show started off by having the guests tell us a little bit about what it was like being them growing up. So take us back to being Richard as a kid, as a teenager, wherever you want to take us back to, and help us paint the picture of sort of what it was like being you growing up and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So I was born with a tie and a stethoscope. And then from that day forth, my plan was already cemented. No, I was the kid in high school who I had a grade point average of, I was like C minus. I got a D in biology and was into skateboards and music and bands and things like that. And so at that time, there was no idea that I was going to be doing what I'm doing right now. And so I remember actually first when I told my parents I'm going to be a physician, they appropriately laughed. And this was in college. We had my grandma who was at our house. She had Lou Gehrig's disease. And so my mom was taking care of her and experienced that. And at that point, decided that I wanted to be a doctor. And then just kind of the studying turned on. And all of a sudden there was something that was interesting to me. And it kind of went from there. But yeah, not the typical, I think, hardworking high school physician kid scoring on all the tests. It really was more later in life. So there's hope for any parents out there who have kids who are like me and you weren't sure what they're going to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. And certainly it always helps to have, sort of that goal. So, once you sort of know what you're striving for, it's easier to, I feel like, to get there. So tell us a little bit about your training. Where did you go to school? And I think you're an ER physician, right?
That's right. Emergency physician here at Mayo Clinic. So I grew up in the Chicago area and I went to the University of Illinois in Chicago for undergraduate and then went to Mayo Medical School. So there's a medical school at Mayo Clinic and it's 40 individuals. I think it's the smallest medical school class size we have in the United States. Went there and so that's 4 years. And then after that, decided emergency medicine, ended up fitting my kind of personality. And so did that at University of California, San Francisco in Fresno. That's where their emergency medicine residency was. Stayed there and then stayed in California for like 20 years and then returned to Mayo in 2015. And while I was in California, I started out practicing taking care of patients and then getting leadership positions, ended up getting an MBA, ended up doing graduate training in executive coaching, started some organizations. Things kind of evolved, taking care of one patient at a time versus helping to lead the care of populations of patients. So
yeah. So how did you sort of transition into being, the leadership expert that you are now? I think that's a pretty interesting path. You've just recently published a Wall Street Journal bestseller, which is amazing. Congratulations on that. The title is You're the Leader, Now What? So super interested to sort of hear that path and how that sort of transpired for you.
It really starts out, I'm taking care of patients one at a time and starting to see things where I think that things can be done better. And it's either you're shouting into the abyss or you start attending some meetings. And then as I start attending meetings, there's just a different way of, you walk into a room and I see a patient, I take a history and then I write medicine, you write an order. And then you go to the next room. You can't go into a committee meeting and write an order and leave and expect anything to be done. And so it's just a whole different thing. And so, and it actually isn't that much different even at the bedside, because if you're just writing in an order and you're not paying attention to the nurses and the pharmacists and the family members and the medics and all those sorts of things, you're not going to be a good leader at the bedside. Same sort of thing as start making decisions with those formal leadership roles. And so that really is the introduction, finding just that actually in those moments, my expertise, everything that I had done in the past, it's helpful. There's some background there, but really to be a better leader was to be really open and understand and be discovering different perspectives and trying to bring those together. And that was kind of the nidus for the beginning of looking at how to be a better leader.
Yeah. I'm curious, was there like an epiphany moment where you're like, did you struggle with leadership and then sort of, have to put some time and effort into figuring it out? Or were you kind of a natural in that sort of realm?
I was a natural at making dumb decisions. I mean, I was, and so there's lots of mistakes. That's, I think, for most leaders, I'm going to maybe hope or project a little bit. Just a lot of mistakes, and you do things and you realize that isn't the way that I would have liked to have presented myself, or that isn't the way I would approach it now. In the moment, things seem so certain, but upon reflection, maybe there's a different approach. And a lot of becoming a better leader is those moments where you feel like you didn't do a good job, and you're trying to learn how to be better. And so very much lots of mistakes, continue to make mistakes, and hopefully continue to learn from them.
Yeah. I feel like ER docs are really good, because I used to work in the ER. ER docs are really good at sort of building teams and that camaraderie. It's a different situation compared to other units around the hospital. Part of that's probably because, you're super dependent on everybody around you when there's, 3 codes walking in, or not walking in, but rolling in, a few hours apart from each other, or even a few minutes sometimes. Do you think that helped you at all, being ER physician, sort of having to go through those frequent emergency situations with a team of people?
Yeah. And so, for many physicians, you're going from floor to floor, and there's lots of different teams that you're working with. In emergency medicine, there is this common space. And so you're working with the same individuals day in and day out, and very different situations. So I think there is a camaraderie there in emergency medicine that I appreciate. And then there's also, you're there at all times during the day. And so there are times at 3 a.m. that it's different than 2 p.m. And as you're working with individuals in those circumstances, I think it brings people together, shared experiences. Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between leadership and management? I'm curious what your take is on that.
Yeah. So let me start out with leaders. I think leaders are individuals who help develop other leaders, basically. And so let's kind of, and so not developing followers. And so what a leader is doing is helping to get the best out of a team, helping to get the best out of an individual, looking for some forward strategy and figuring out how to get there. And that includes the display of values and strategy and mission and looking forward, all those sorts of things. I think of management as, our best leaders are also very good managers. I think of management as being more like the to-do list of the things that need to be done, and making sure things are in line and getting things accomplished. And so you can have all the vision and strategy and leadership there, but if you're also not managing for results, then there's a gap there. And so both of those skills are needed for anyone who wants to be a good manager or a good leader.
Mm-hmm. You've been around the healthcare space for a while. What's your take on some of the most common sort of deficiencies among managers who are in the meeting rooms? And what are some of the most common deficiencies or areas where you see like a very common thread of like, hey, this skill or this piece is missing very frequently. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think so. It's present in healthcare, but I think it's present everywhere. So for most individuals, the reason they become leaders is because they're really good at doing something, and whether that's in sales or marketing or engineering, and all of a sudden you're very productive, and then you're asked to step up into leadership positions, or people step back, and you're the one who's left remaining, and so we oftentimes get there because of our expertise and because of what we know and our ability to get things done by ourselves. And then there's this just complete change of now, okay, that's no longer so helpful. You now need to step back, kind of step up from your expertise and start to look at the whole system and try to figure out, instead of how you can individually do things, how you can facilitate groups of individuals doing things, how you can coach others, help them see things in ways that help them make sense of the world in a better, kind of more effective way. And so we all have these instincts as we enter probably most situations. I mean, like I have 17-year-old, 19-year-old daughters, and they come to me with their issues. And I've been to high school, I've been to college. I have lots of answers in the moment, but realizing that that's probably not the best approach because they're living different lives than me. I think our leaders and our managers face the same thing. I mean, you can walk into a meeting, any topic, I bet in the moment, you know exactly what should be done, but there's also the blind spots that you have behind your decision making that we need to get around, and we also need to bring people together to move forward together.
I was listening to a Seth Godin book last week, and I don't remember the exact sort of quote, but he was describing leadership, and that was his book called Tribes. He was describing leadership as more of a role of influence. Is there any specific strategies that you can sort of point to sort of influence people to perform a certain way or to create a certain result? Versus, there's always the old school sort of military style where like you mentioned, you issue an order and things just get done, but that doesn't go around. That doesn't float these days. Now it's, you got to get buy-in. And so what are some strategies for sort of?
Yeah, I think there's certainly times where leaders need to influence their power to get things done. And so that command and control sometimes you need to do that. But good leaders are agile and they're able to adapt to the situation. And so what's, I think, the best influence for me to best influence you? It's not likely going to be for me to tell you what I think you should do, but it's going to be me understanding what you want to do, what your interests are, how you're seeing the world, and how that vibes with our strategy together and where we're wanting to go. And then how you are interested in moving forward there together. I think that's a better way of influencing. It's really figuring out how to connect with the interests, the values of the individuals that you're working with.
Yeah. So kind of finding that common, that common thread and sort of, relying on that to sort of build a common goal, it sounds like. Awesome. You recently wrote your book, which is called You're the Leader Now What? Leadership Lessons from Mayo Clinic. I'm curious because I'm actually writing a book right now.
Good job.
Yeah, it's about 85% done. We're still working pretty hard, pretty diligently at writing it. But tell me a little bit about this book and sort of what the writing process was like for you, and some things that you've learned as you've to write a book. I'm now learning. You're spending hundreds of hours digging, researching, writing, rewriting, editing. Tell me some of the things that you've learned through that process.
Yeah, so it started really as I'm an executive coach and I'm coaching leaders at all levels, and from the senior leaders on down, this question would come up, which is, you're in these situations where all your colleagues are disagreeing and everyone's kind of looking to you to solve things. And in my conversations, they're like, so now what? What do I do? And these situations occur whether that's one-to-one conversations with colleagues or whether you're dealing with large teams or organizations and trying to move things forward. Just these common themes that come up, and it usually starts with individuals overplaying their expertise. And so then how do you approach things from a perspective of a coach and a facilitator? And so I started creating some talks, and so to help leaders just transition through, find some tactics and some frameworks during some of these difficult scenarios. And each of these talks became individual chapters. And so the nice thing and as I'm delivering a program, which is multiple talks, I want a flow of the program. It's almost like writing a story. There's an arc to it. You're bringing in different things and you're building upon learning and you're applying that sort of, that learning. And for me in those programs, I like to bring in individuals who have challenges and then help them solve their challenges. And so typical within the business community is case studies where you're studying someone else's. This is what they did. This is how they approached it. I like to have individuals bring their own issues. And so then we're going to help the teams or the individual work through that. And so I created, these talks, and these talks turned into chapters of books. And the nice thing about giving talks is it's an iterative thing. You hear some things that turn out well, some things that people didn't really get, and then you can edit and rewrite, and very much like writing a book. So it fit in well. And as you know, as you're saying, it's a lot of work. You throw a lot of stuff away. And as you're writing, you learn a lot of stuff. You gain insights about the things that you're thinking about in new ways just by putting things down on page.
Awesome. How long do you think it took you to get the book written? I'm just curious.
Well, I think it depends. So the actual writing, it really depends. And so as I put together talks, that was a couple of years of me just putting together talks.
Yeah. And
then you have the book proposal. And then it was probably about, probably a year to a year and a half of the writing process. And for me, this was emergency physician writing during COVID. And so squeezing in time there. And then an interesting thing about writing a book is you finish the book and you think, okay, great. But then there's another 8 months after you're done writing the book before it hits the shelves. So it's an interesting, learning process just as you're going through that.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing. I was just kind of curious what your process was like and how it was for you. You recently wrote an article called 4 Things That Good Leaders Do When Facing Obstacles That Bad Leaders Don't. I'm curious, tell us a little bit about that article that you wrote and some of those things.
Yeah. So I think so what are some things that leaders do that make them successful that others don't? I think one of the things is adopting a coaching framework. And so that really is asking individuals questions that help them make sense of the world. But many leaders approach leadership as being a mentor, whereas I've been there and I've done that, and given my experience, this is what I think. But again, just using that coaching framework, I think that's one thing. Another thing is that leaders tend to be afraid of understanding the fears and worries that are behind the strategies that they're moving forward with. And so they tend to push people forward with the strategy, and they're hesitant to bring up what might be the concerns, what might be your fears, what might be your worries. And when they do that, these fears and worries are like the monsters in the dark that are just going to eat your strategy. And so there's an opportunity actually to shine a light on the fears and worries, and then to bring that into the strategy and figure out with your strategy how you might mitigate the chance of those fears and worries from occurring. And as you do that, people feel heard because they're being heard. And that also supplies some energy to help the strategy move forward. And so there's a lot of, I see a lot of leaders, I'll go into an organization and they want me to give a talk or to help the leadership team. Whatever you do, don't mention this, they'll say. And for me, I'm thinking that's exactly what I'm going to mention, because this is the darkness that we need to shine a light on.
Yeah.
And so, and I think probably another thing is that leaders feeling like they need to know the answer. You just don't. And in fact, if you feel like you're entering a situation and you know the answer, particularly in a space of unknowns where things are complex and steadily evolving, knowing the answer is going to be a hindrance. And so as much as you can step back and help, that's going to be a more appropriate approach. The nice thing about that is then it takes some of the heat off of you. I mean, if you feel like you need to have the answer for everything, that's just as bad as having the answer for everything.